I didn't even hit the gavel. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone to our meeting today. We have a lot of guests, first time people with us today because of, I guess, the discussion about the ARP. That seems to be in the forefront of everybody these days. Discussion. I hope answers from those discussions. But thank you all for being here. Before I introduce some special guests, I'd like to call on Mayor Jackson to that's to follow.
Let's bow. Dear Father, so thankful for this day, for this opportunity for us to come together and discuss the businesses of our communities. Dear Father, so thankful for each one that's here today for what they do to make their communities a better place to work and to live. Dear Father, we ask you to be with the folks that work at the development district as they help us and assist us each day to make sure that we are providing the best services to our community that we can. Dear Father, we ask you to bless the food that has been prepared, may provide the nourishment to our bodies that we need. Dear Father, we ask that once this meeting is over with, you give us all a safe journey back to our homes. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, Mayor Jackson. It says here that we're going to dispense with the roll call, but I'm supposed to remind everyone to make sure you did sign in. That's how we'll get the roll this morning. Some of the guests, we have Stanza Settles. Is that right, Stan? He's here with us today from Senator Haggerty's office. Kelly Puckett, Senator Blackburn, and Shirley Pond is with the Congressman Desjardins' office. Thank you all for being here. Heather Duncan, CTAS. Hey, Heather, our new CTAS rep. Mona Rogers and Brad Harris from MTAS. Thank you all for being here. And since our last board meeting, we have some new members of the executive committee because of, I guess, elections that have gone on recently.
He is not.
I'm not going to introduce him.
Okay, it's your prerogative.
Mayor of Dayton, Hurley Marsh. You're not here either. Mayor of Dunlap, Clint Huth. Is that right? Huth? Okay.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Jason Turner, Mayor of Jasper. Yes, sir, Jason. And Tom Mako. Meeks. Okay, I'm sorry. Her writing's funny. Sorry about that. Mayor of Colmont, right? Glad to have you all with us, I guess, for the first time, at least as board members. Keith Cartwright, can you declare a quorum based on the sign-in?
We can. We do have a quorum, so
Thank you, Keith. Minutes were previously emailed to the executive committee members and are included in your packets. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Any corrections, comments, questions? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Motion passes. Administrative reports. Mayor Gentry is unable to be here today. He's chairman of our finance committee, so Beth's going to give our financial statement report.
If you'll look on the left-hand side of your packet, you'll see financial statements current as of May the 31st. The first sheet is your balance sheet or your statement of financial position. Under assets, there's really not anything that you all aren't used to seeing. Our total assets currently are right at $15,580,841. Your liabilities are at $3,054,386,000, and the month ended with $794,599 in excess of revenues. I always tell y'all, don't get excited. All of that's not real cash, and we'll explain as we go forward. But your fund balance is currently at $12,526,455. If you turn to the next page, for the benefit of our new members that are not familiar with our statements, we basically budget in according to percentages. So to make this easy for you all to understand, if you'll look all the way to the right-hand column, that is where you will see the percentage that depicts where that line item is in the budget. You are 11 out of 12 months. So you would like to see revenues at 92% or above. They are at 75%, lagging slightly behind. Again, this is due to an abundance of workforce development dollars that we haven't been able to program due to the pandemic, due to the lack of school being open, due to classes, those kinds of things. So not to worry. What you want to make sure of then is that our expenses don't exceed our revenues. So if you look down to line item 22 and across, you'll see total operating expenses are right at 75%, or $1.3 million below the budget. The only expense items in excess of the budget at this time are our usual suspects: dues and subscriptions, which is line item 19, slightly ahead at 105%, and line item 20, which are your marketing expenses. And again, I'll remind the board, this was because we got a lot of CARES tourism dollars that were not budgeted, but we have spent and we have programmed. Everything below line item 22 are pass-through dollars. Turning to the next page is your summarized revenue expense statement by department. Community development and economic development get real excited at this time of the year because typically we show them running at a deficit all year long. This is when they finally get to take account of all the administrative fees and the other monies that they've earned during the year. So again, you'll see the expenses by department. Administratively, overhead for the month was only at 3.89%. Next page is a summary of your cash flow. Currently in the bank, we have $4,048,719. And you'll see the accounting of the loan funds that belong to the different jurisdictions. Those are the balances. Again, I promised I would explain what the $794,599 represents. In that amount, I'll remind you all that there was $690,000 of loan funds that we passed through on behalf of the city of Cleveland, on behalf of the city of Chattanooga, and also our EDA COVID CARES revolving loan fund. There was a loan loss reserve that we budgeted at $129,000. I'll remind the board members, the loan loss reserve varies by month depending on the number of loans that are overdue 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, so it goes up and down. And then we added back money to the foundation of $383,451. So your bottom line for the month is $358,894. I'll be glad to entertain any questions.
Any questions about the financial statements? Not, these have not been to finance, so I do need a motion to accept or approve financial statements. So moved. Second?
Second.
Who was the second person? Okay.
Any questions or comments? Not, all those in favor say aye. Opposed likewise, motion passes. And since Mayor Gentry is not here to review the proposed budget, it has been to finance, right?
Yes, sir.
So Beth will take care of that.
All right, in your packet, you'll see your proposed budget for fiscal year 22. I'm only gonna hit the highlights. If you'll turn to page 2, and again, Jolly, Jim, Jackie, Elliot, all of the people in finance do such an awesome job. You will notice at the bottom, there is a footnote for every single line item of revenue. The reality is our budget last year was right at $21 million. For 2022, it'll be right at $19 million. The basic difference were the additional COVID CARES money that we got in a lot of the programs that came as a result of the pandemic. But you'll see the specific notations down below that tell you what the increases and the decreases are in the budget. If you turn to page 3, this is the expenses, the proposed expenses for the year. You'll notice that we've increased personnel and other expenses by $172,538. The rest of the increases are pass-through dollars. That slight increase does account for some staffing positions, as well as the board did budget a performance compensation for employees that have earned that. I'll remind the board, no compensation raises were given during the past year. So moving on, you can see an accounting by department of all the revenues. Lastly, on your capital expenses, we did increase building maintenance, which was a godsend to $100,000, since we currently have an air unit that is out on the front of the building that's going to be expensive to repair. And we also have a plumber coming tomorrow to see about what appears to be some stormwater that is invading the building. So we wanted to be sure we could address that. Your IT cost, and this is what's so important to this board, not really a capital expense, but I like to keep you all aware of it because it is our technology and our security that enables us to produce the volumes that we do. And your technology costs are $227,230. We did check with our IT provider relative to where were we relative to hacking threats, security risk, all of that other. We're about as good as we can get with remote backup, with other firewalls and everything else, without stepping up to a level that we can't really afford. Any board members that want an accounting of that, I'll be glad to share it with you. It might be a good list to ask some of your IT people about the various things. I told the board this. We did have a sister agency that was hacked and was ransomed, and they had to buy their technology back. So didn't really share with us what they paid. I just know, and those of you that have worked with us before know what the value of all that data is. It would be very difficult to replace. So anyway, there are still 3 replacement vehicles budgeted. Those were budgeted last year in the fleet. We did not replace them. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of travel that went on last year. We will only replace those on an as-need basis. That is your proposed budget. Lots of detail in here.
Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee did meet June the 2nd, and this does go in form of motion.
Okay, do I have a second to accept the budget, proposed budget?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? That was a very quick overview of the budget. So if there's any questions or comments, Beth will answer them.
Jolly Jim, the whole staff. Finance did spend an hour going through all the details, so I want to assure you that we didn't glass through it.
Yeah, I agree. We go through it more than it looks like in these meetings, for sure.
Yeah.
And it is balanced. That's the key. Any questions or comments? If not, all those in favor of the proposed budget, say aye. Opposed likewise. Motion passes. RD resolution placemaking, Beth.
In your packet is a board resolution to approve us to apply for a Rural Placemaking Innovative Challenge Grant from USDA. We've been encouraged once again by our partners at USDA to apply for this money that helps support the work that we're already doing. It's a 2-year grant for $250,000 that will augment staffing capacity, and there's a $45,000 match. It's due 17th of July. Is that right, Sam? Where's Sam? Okay, July 17th. Is that right? Okay.
Okay, any questions about the resolution? applying for a grant. Pretty much a no-brainer, I guess. To have a motion to approve. Second? Go sleep on your head. Thank you, sir. All those in favor say aye. Opposed likewise? Motion passes. Loans for approval. Todd?
Sure.
This loan is to Lolly Ventures, doing business as the Cavern, which is a music venue in Grundy County. They're requesting $200,564 in funding from the EPA CARES Act loan fund to use as permanent working capital for the business in Pelham. These funds replenish funds spent by the company during COVID-19 shutdown, used for a build out of an outdoor amphitheater. The total project was $401,129 in equity from the borrower, made up 50% of that, and our loans for 50% of that. Collateral is a second lien position on commercial real estate. The loan will be guaranteed by the majority owner, Todd Mayo. The loan has a term of 10 years and priced at 1%. The business will be able to retain their 6 full-time employees and their 80 part-time contract employees, or 40 full-time equivalent. This loan was presented to and approved by the loan committee.
So therefore, it comes in the form of a motion from the loan committee. Do we have a second to the motion?
Second.
Any questions, comments, discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Opposed likewise? Motion passes. You got it, Todd. Now, what we're probably most all here for is to hear more about the ARP, American Rescue Recovery Funding. Chuck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the left-hand side of your package, you'll find this sheet of paper. It has American Rescue Plan resources, has some links and some places you can go to find some more information. We also downloaded a copy of the most recent frequently asked questions from Treasury. That should also be in there. These are relevant as of June 17th, so that probably means they're no longer valid.
Sure.
And we did put a copy of a map that shows opportunity zones and qualified census tracts. And we're hoping to get some clarification. Supposedly you can do about anything in those two areas, and an opportunity zone and a qualified census tract. We are going to be joined today by Muriel Burgoyne and Joe McKinney. They're with the National Association of Development Organizations. That's our agency, local development district. That's our resource in federal level with US. They do advocacy on our part. So they've been getting into this. I'm not sure they're going to join us virtually. They have not joined us yet. They were supposed to join at 11. We will, if you have questions, we'll be able to take questions. We can put it in the chat. We do have a few minutes. They're not on, so we'll ask Chad to sing a hymn.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that.
One thing we can talk a little bit about, because I know the comptroller's office has put a lot of information out. There's no doubt that we want our local governments to invest this money strategically and to do it correctly. One of the things that's in the board's packet that we can go ahead and y'all can be thinking about, I was going to ask you to do it afterwards, is we have a federal financial expert by the name of Bob Lloyd that has been doing federal accounting, federal auditing. He's written the super circular, knows people in Treasury that we have often utilized when costs have been questioned. He can quote regs, verse, everything. And basically I reached out to Bob to say, look, our folks need some help. If nothing else, we need help in trying to justify some of these investments, how to document these investments. You've got the connections. Would you be willing to be put on a retainer and be available to the folks in the Southeast region, in the Chattanooga Area Council of Governments? And he has sent me a proposal that's about $9,600 to retain him for the next year that we then can extend. You all would basically be funneling that stuff to us, and he will help us go through justifications. verifications, answer questions, look at plans, all that kind of stuff. We can't say enough about this guy. Anytime that we have waded into muddy waters with the state of Tennessee about federal funds, this is the guy that knows it all. I mean, he, like I said, he can quote the reg verse and everything else. He also shared with me, I've shared with him a lot of the stuff that has come out statewide. You know, my challenge to you all is, let's think very strategically about these once in a lifetimes, once in a generation dollars. Let's look and make investments that will generate jobs and revenues for future generations to come, to the extent that you possibly can. These monies all have to be paid back. We're all taxpayers. We know it's going to be future generations to come that are going to be paying back a lot of these dollars. So we need to help generate additional revenues and additional jobs going forward in the future. So think about them being catalytic, think about them being transformational. Bob Lloyd indicated that when this started, these dollars were supposed to be like federal revenue sharing on steroids, which means if y'all remember the days of federal revenue sharing, it just helped you plug some holes and helped you do a lot of things and whatnot. So I'm going to ask for y'all's permission to sign that contract. Don't really have to, since it's less than $25,000, but I want you all to know that we're trying to put the resources in place that can help us do things correctly. We will have additional webinars and seminars, and he has agreed that he will come to our region either virtually or in person to meet with local governments, your finance people, your trustees, whoever it is, to walk them through a lot of this stuff. I don't know, we haven't heard anything, and maybe M-Test or C-Test, we hadn't heard anything from the state about when city municipal dollars will be available to be drawn down. I don't know if you all have gotten any word about that. They're got to come sooner rather than later in that regard. For counties and entitlement cities, you all know there's a treasury portal that you have to register in. Yes, you do have to do ID Me with the license, with a photo recognition, with your social security number, with your birthday. That's just the way it's going to be. So are they here, Chuck?
Yeah, we're ready.
I'll hush.
Mayor, you might want to.
Don't wanna blind
slide over. Muriel, Joe, can you hear us?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Joe. Thank you for joining us. You and Muriel. We have a bunch of mayors. We've got congressional people. We have finance directors. So I know y'all have a presentation. You might want to introduce yourself and then go from there.
Sure. I'll start, and then Muriel, who is the expert, will jump in when it gets hard. But first of all,
sorry, Joe, can you also give me screen sharing permissions, and I'll share our slides.
So as the slides are pulled up, I'll just, one, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. We certainly appreciate Beth's participation in our organization. I think, as you know, she's a leader in your region, certainly a leader in Tennessee, but also nationally, she's very well respected. And when she says she wants us, we jump, because she's certainly a big supporter of ours. Just a little background, and then I'll let Muriel get into the subject matter, but wanted to give you an idea of who NATO is. We are the National Association of Development Organizations. We go by NATO. It's not the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. My kids think I work for NATO, but it's actually NATO. And we call it development organizations because many of you know, it goes, our organizations go by a lot of different names depending on the state. It can be councils of governments, regional councils, economic development district, local development districts. But I think they all have the same thing in common, and that is at the core, they're supporting their communities with economic and community development programs. And so We have been in existence now for, I think, 52 years. And I know that your organization has been a strong member for a very long time. A lot of what we do, you're looking at the full legislative team of NATO. We are a small organization, but we're mighty in strength. We partner a lot with a number of organizations you might be familiar with as well. We have strong relationships with the National Association of Counties, the Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, a number of different organizations that I think have similar interests. So just wanted to kind of give you that background so you'll know who we are. And we're going to talk just a little bit about funding that I'm sure you're aware of, and Muriel will kind of get in the weeds, but just as an overview, many of you know the first stimulus bill was passed back in March of 2020, the CARES Act. We, fortunately, over the years, Muriel and I have made some really good contacts in a lot of House and Senate offices and kind of got a heads up from a number of congressional offices that this CARES package was coming through, and asked for our input on how the development organizations, the economic development districts can assist in the recovery effort. And we were fortunate at that time to be included. I know a lot of the organizations receive additional funding, either revolving loan funding for their lending program or additional planning dollars and so forth. And we were very fortunate to see that. And then the second one that I think we'll spend a majority of the time today is the one that was just recently passed this March, the American Rescue Plan Act. And the next slide has a number of different COVID relief packages, but the two that, again, we'll focus on is the March 6, 2020, and then the one most recently here in March of 2021. Muriel, I'm going to hand it off to you, and I'll hop in if you need me, but I'll let Muriel take it from here.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I know that all of you are pretty focused today on the American Rescue Plan Act and especially the state and local relief funds. As you all know, there is quite a lot of guidance, a lot of information still to sift through and interpret. So please jump in anytime with all the different folks you have in the room. There are going to be some of you who know more than we do. So please interrupt us and share additional information that you may have from other sources. But what we'll try to do is kind of walk through, especially some of the state and local relief funding and sort of what we know at this point in our read of the guidance. And again, please feel free to jump in with questions. I'll also just touch very briefly on the American Rescue Plan Act and some of what it contained aside from the state and local relief funds. One of the most exciting elements from NATO's perspective was the $3 billion in supplemental funding for the Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration. For context, that is a very large number for EDA. That is twice the amount of funding that EDA received through the CARES Act and nearly 10 times EDA's typical annual appropriation. So we're very excited about that funding. The guidance has not yet been released for the EDA funds, but if anyone has questions about maybe what to expect or prepare for, we're happy to try and shed some light on that as well. Otherwise, I'm going to jump right ahead to the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So what you're seeing here is what the bill language, and I know some of our congressional folks in the room can perhaps speak to this even more than we can, but some of the congressional language and bill language in terms of what Congress intended in the American Rescue Plan Act. And to just kind of break it down to a very granular level, there were 4 use of funds categories that were eligible in accordance with what the bill language actually said. And that's the use of funds here, the A, B, C, and D. So item A, funds can be used to respond to the public health emergency. There's mention of assistance to households, assistance to small businesses, to nonprofits and impacted industries such as travel and tourism. Item B, workers performing essential work and providing premium pay to those eligible workers that are doing essential work during the pandemic. Item C, provision of government services to make up for revenue losses. So to the extent of the reduction in revenue that the government has experienced during the public health emergency. And then item D, to make necessary improvements in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. So that's what the bill told us. And then of course we waited for all of this guidance to come out from Treasury. Linked all throughout this slides are all different kinds of links to resources, and they're constantly being updated. So you can see some of these FAQs that Treasury is releasing have been updated as recently as June 17th. So there's always new information coming forward, and that is the nature of this, especially because this is an interim final rule that Treasury has released. So Treasury is both implementing this rule and they're also requesting comments at the same time. So things are rapidly changing. A couple important things to say there is if you're encountering any major problems or barriers with this rule, please let NATO know. That's something we will comment on. It's something we'll follow up on. And it may also be something you want to comment on or address directly with Treasury. And there's a couple ways to do that. And then just being aware that this guidance could continue to change for the next few months at least. So now I want to go a little bit more into depth on those eligible items A, B, C, and D that we showed on the previous slide. So the interim final rule, the way it's built out, it includes non-exclusive lists of allowable expenditures. So the interim final rule doesn't tell you everything you could possibly do with these funds, but it gives you some idea and some examples of allowable expenditures. And the way Treasury is handling this is saying proactively that if you spend the money in those ways, they're going to proactively give you kind of the presumption of eligible expenditures. They're going to presume that it's an eligible expenditure if you're using it in one of these ways. Again, that's not a limitation. It doesn't necessarily mean that other things aren't eligible. It just means you may not get the same kind of presumption of eligibility if you don't go along these lines. So item A is that public health and economic impact category that was in the bill. And in the Treasury final rule, it's kind of broken out into two pieces. One is responding to COVID-19 and kind of the public health side. And the item 2 is responding to the negative economic impacts and kind of the longer term economic consequences. And so on this slide, you're seeing some examples, things like testing and contact tracing, mental health and substance abuse, payroll and covered benefits, public health and safety staff. That all is falling under item A in the kind of COVID-19 direct response category. And then over on the negative economic impact side, you have things like assistance to unemployed workers. That can include job training, to get people back to work. Assistance to households, that can include things like food assistance, rent, mortgage, utility assistance. Preventing evictions, preventing homelessness, internet access. Expenses to improve some efficacy of state and local programs is listed. Assistance to small businesses and nonprofits. You can give loans or grants to small businesses or nonprofits with these funds. Rehiring state and local staff, rehiring public sector staff up to the pre-pandemic staffing level that existed previously if there were layoffs. And then aid to impacted industries, recovering or speeding the recovery of things like the travel and tourism and hospitality sectors. So that's item A, and we will go on to B, C, and D of the eligible uses. Item B in the eligible uses is premium pay for essential workers, for people who have kept all these essential services and essential businesses going throughout the pandemic. So that's going to include staff at nursing homes, hospitals, home care settings, workers in food production facilities, janitors, sanitation workers, all different kinds of public health and safety staff. You see childcare workers, educators, social services, and human services staff. So that is some examples. Again, you get that presumption of eligibility if you decide to provide premium pay to any of these kinds of workers. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is the only option. It just means that these are some eligible options. And I will say that the FAQs that Treasury has released that were linked a few slides previously give us even more detail about what they mean by public health and safety staff, for example. There's specific examples listed out. The other item is in the red text down here on this side. I just want to point out that they are defining this premium pay to mean an amount up to $13 per hour in addition to the wages the worker otherwise receives, and that aggregate amount can't exceed $25,000 per eligible worker. So that's how much premium pay you could be paying these workers on top of their existing salaries. Eligible uses, item C is replacing public sector revenue loss. This is one of the most flexible areas of funds. So things that aren't listed in the Treasury rule, you can still do potentially if you're, to the extent that you're replacing public sector revenue loss. This one gets more complicated. There's some formulas in there. There's some complexity, and Joe and I don't pretend to be experts on that, but the experts we will point you to are the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities. And the reason why is because they really led the lobbying effort for these funds. And so as a result, they are some of the leading experts. NACO, of course, lobbied for the county funding. NLC lobbied for the city and municipal government funding. So go to those two sources for a lot of this information. There's a link here kind of going through how these revenue loss calculations work. And then finally, eligible uses, item D is water, sewer, and broadband. So you have underwater and wastewater. Eligible uses are going to align with the EPA's project categories for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So those are listed there as links for you. And then the broadband category is one that's actually changing currently. The Treasury Department just put out some things clarifying and actually increasing the flexibility in a positive sense with kind of the reliable service definition that has to be met. And so for some additional information on that, there's a National League of Cities article right here talking about kind of the update from Treasury on the broadband eligibility guidance and what can qualify as an eligible expense in the broadband category. So finally, we'll just leave you with a timeline. July 16th is the deadline to comment on the Treasury interim final rule. August 31st is the deadline to start submitting some first interim reports. I believe that Treasury is going to still release more information on the reporting piece. If anyone else in the room knows more than I do about whether that reporting guidance has been released yet, please chime in. But then there's a longer timeline to deal with these funds. So the funds don't have to be obligated until December of 2024, and the funds don't have to be spent until December of 2026. So as these rules continue to change and as we continue to kind of have to wrap our heads around exactly what is and isn't going to be eligible, at least there's a little bit of a runway and some time to figure all of that out. One other item that NATO has been asked a lot, and so I did just want to highlight this, is that the interim final rule does mention some information on transfer of funds. And the interim final rule does allow funds to be transferred to special purpose districts or special purpose units of state and local government. And to the best of NATO's knowledge, that does in many cases encompass our members. However, we don't want to tell you that absolutely. And so we are working with Treasury to get clarification and to ensure that these funds can be transferred to NATO member organizations. But to the best of our knowledge, that is likely something that is going to be eligible, and we'll be following up with additional clarification on that. Again, some resources here pointing you to our friends at NLC and NACO. There are a lot of webinar recordings. They've gone into much more depth than we have on all the eligible uses. Strongly recommend these two webinar recordings. They're very informative. And there's also an email to contact Treasury directly with questions about the Coronavirus State and Local Relief Fund. And so would encourage you to do that, would encourage you to consider commenting on the final rule, because again, this is something that is changing and expanding. So I think I'll actually stop there rather than going through all of our other legislative updates, because I know this group is really focused on the state and local relief funding today. If time allows, we can kind of launch into a few of these other things: president's budget, infrastructure, We have an EDA Assistant Secretary nominee and some other things that NATO has been working on. But I'm actually just going to stop at our contact information. We may not be able to answer every question on the spot, but we will follow up if you have questions you would like us to look into. And I'll stop there and turn it back to Joe or back over to our meeting hosts to kind of go into a questions portion.
Okay, thanks, Muriel, for that. And just so everybody knows, Muriel did send me this presentation, so I have it. I'll email it out this afternoon to everyone. Okay, so we do have that. So you can go to these links. Does anybody have a question for Muriel? Yes, Brad.
12/31/24 funds must be obligated to take the sign or that they don't want obligated.
Did you hear that, Muriel?
No, we didn't hear it. Can you repeat?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Go ahead, one more time, louder.
What do you mean at 12/31/24 that funds must be obligated? What does obligated mean?
The question was, the funds have to be obligated by 12/31/24. Can you give us a definition of what obligated is?
Sure. So meaning that the funds have to be there has to be a designated purpose. A decision has to have been made about what those funds are going to be used for. And that intention has to have been set, but they don't necessarily have to have been spent completely until 2026.
So maybe a city or a county passes a resolution to obligate those funds, that would be sufficient.
Right, exactly.
They do not have to be under contract at that time, correct?
I don't think so, Mira. I think it's just obligated to the project. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Any other questions? Chance. We'll wait back into the ether.
Ask Commissioner for clarification of loss of revenues relative to like jails because of state.
Has there been any decisions made, folks, about the loss of revenue to a local government because they do not have state prisoners in the jail? They turned all the prisoners loose, so they lost money in their jail budget. Has that been looked at? But overall, they have no loss. It was just in that line item.
I'll start, Muriel. You can hop in. Really, two things. I think the email address that Muriel provided for Treasury that'd be a great question to ask them. I think, from my understanding, they are responding to a lot of those questions pretty quickly. But the other thing I would say is in discussions. Also, I think that Treasury, as well as the other agencies, want to be as flexible as possible if you can show that type of loss. I would not take my word for it, but I would just, this is my opinion, I think that is something that would be eligible, and that's something you could justify as showing an impact on your local budget. But I mean, I think the best thing to do would probably be to email or have your staff email directly to that to give them a better idea of those challenges.
I understand what you're saying there, but the language originally said that it was not per department, it was the totality of the budget. And that's where we're having a problem. The totality of the budget, there's not a loss, but there's a loss in like the jail, there's a loss in hotel motel funding, departments and those kinds of things. So are they going to allow us to do it by department, or is it going to stay totality of the total budget?
Well, what you might want to do is actually look at one of the other eligible use categories in that instance then. I understand the question now better now that you've explained that. I think that since you have the A, B, C, D category, revenue loss is only item C. So you still have potentially the possibility that it could maybe fit into item A. Public safety, public health and safety staff falls under there. And so it's possible that public safety is something where the prison system would fall into that category. And so maybe look at if there's another way to kind of achieve what you're looking to achieve aside from the revenue loss category.
Supplant their salaries and their wages with American Rescue dollars before you have to jail workers and stuff.
So are you basically, Muriel, you're basically saying that we should use the American ARP funds to supplant that staff's salary so that we can use those funds to make up the balance? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily to make up the balance, but premium pay for essential workers is an eligible category. So maybe look into whether the prison staff would fit under a premium pay category that's possible, or under item A, the public health and safety staff category. It's something I can look into a little bit for you. I don't know off the top of my head if there's specific wording about that type of worker. So let me look into that for you and follow up with the group, because it's a great question.
Okay.
And what I would wonder is if there's a way to make it fit somewhere. It may not be under the revenue loss category if you can't demonstrate an overall revenue loss, but there might be a way to make it fit somewhere. And so we'll try to look into that for you and follow up with some specific language if we can find some in the rule.
Yeah, and it'd be the same thing with county-owned ambulance services, stuff like that. You know, they took such a hit. So yeah, anything you can find out about that would be great. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
When it comes to determining an essential employee, who is the one that's going to make the final decision? Because all of our employees are essential if they're still with us.
Yep, great question. So it certainly feels like every employee is more essential than ever in these times. So I definitely feel you on that one. There is this kind of premium pay for essential workers. They're listed out here, but there is much more, even more specific information on an FAQ resource that I'll point you to. So this gives you kind of an idea of what these workers might be considered as you know, essential workers that you could provide premium pay to. But there's also this FAQ resource right here. This is on slide 9. And there's new updates as of June 17th. If you kind of control find, or if you kind of go through that for premium pay or for essential worker or public health and safety staff, I think it's mentioned using a few different terms. There is even more specific information and lists of workers that would be eligible under this category. And again, remember, this is just the presumption of eligible expenditures. This is a non-exclusive list of allowable expenditures. So if you don't see the type of worker you're trying to provide premium pay to in the rule or in the FAQs, it doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't be eligible. It just means that you don't have that presumption of eligibility, that you might actually have to follow up with Treasury to provide more details, more guidance about why this is essential. And I believe that additional information will be coming from Treasury in the coming days that will kind of help us understand how they're looking for additional documentation if you want to do something maybe a little bit more outside of the box.
So, Muriel, what if they pass a resolution that declares all of their employees essential? I mean,
That one, I'm not sure. That one might be harder. I don't know if that's, if they will be that flexible.
well, I just had to ask the question. I mean, you know, HUD lets us pass a resolution that declares something slums and blights. So I just thought, I wondered if they declared all of their employees were essential because they continued to work during the pandemic. So, I mean, they had to operate. So, okay. All right, other questions? And I think for you and Joe, Tennessee is kind of in a unique situation from the fact that we know when this was crafted, it was for a lot of states that were already in financial trouble. And then the pandemic compounded that. And Georgia too is in a unique situation. We all have continued to do pretty well in spite of the pandemic. In Tennessee, we've been lacking obviously in road maintenance issues, but our legislature passed the Improve Act, which provided additional revenues for roads. So you don't overall see a loss in fuel taxes. And then we started seeing gains in sales tax. I mean, I think Tennessee's one of 7 states in the country that still had a positive economic outlook. But by the same token, we have line items in their budget that they're going to have to use property taxes or sales tax dollars to plug. I mean, when you got $400,000 of loss in jail revenues because you didn't get state prisoners, and they're, some have built new jails. I know you can't use money for debt service, but it was those prisoners that were helping to fund that debt. So we need to try to figure out a way to plug those holes.
Hey, Muriel, you want to elaborate a little bit on the outdoor recreation tourism impact? Because I know that region certainly, I think, is heavily dependent on transport or on travel and tourism and outdoor recreation.
Yeah, sure, definitely. Travel, tourism, and hospitality services are under item A of the eligible uses in the law and in the Treasury guidance. So that is an item that there's definitely, and throughout ARPA, actually, there's been really an effort to make sure that funds are available for aid to impacted industries, for the travel, tourism, hospitality, and outdoor recreation sectors. And so that could be loans, that could be grants using this funding. And the other thing I'll just mention is the EDA funding that still has to come forward. Touched on that a little bit earlier, but we know from the kind of language of the law in the American Rescue Plan Act that there is going to be this $3 billion for EDA, and 25% of those funds are going to be allocated to states and communities that have suffered injury directly within the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation sectors. So there is funding coming forward through a couple of different parts of the ARPA legislation that is really carved out or kind of earmarked, so to speak, for that specific purpose. We don't have the EDA guidance yet. That EDA guidance is forthcoming. And so we don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet, but I think it's possible that we could see some funding going to possibly the state economic development agencies, possibly the state travel and tourism offices. And also there should be some competitive funding where travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation might be an eligible use for a competitive application if you wanted to apply for some of this disaster funding. We believe it's going to be at least 80% federal share with the option of potentially going up to 100% federal share in some cases for the EDA funding. So look out for this slide still says EDA guidance expected mid-June. Now we're getting toward the end of June. That guidance isn't out yet, but it is still expected very soon from what we're being told. So a couple different ways that you might be able to kind of look at securing some relief funding for travel and tourism. Joe, did you want to add anything else?
Just that we're pretty confident that those funds will be going directly to the state, almost like a block grant, and the state will decide the process for that funding. EDA has never really provided like state funding, and so this is, I think, new for them, and they may change that, but from what we're hearing, we feel like they're going to allocate that money to the states, and it will be up to the states to decide the best use of those funds. So I would encourage Beth, you and your colleagues, as well as the local governments, to make sure that you have good relationships with your governor's office, with your travel and tourism, and offer your assistance in any way with those funding. But that's a pretty significant amount of 25% of the $3 billion. It specifically for that. The reason for that certainly is the chair of the committee is from Las Vegas. She's one of our I think she understands economic development districts, very supportive, and she was able to get that set aside for those travel and tourism industries. Certainly Las Vegas was impacted, but across the nation, I'm sure you have communities and and businesses in that industry that were heavily impacted. So just keep an eye out for that, and make sure that you're in communication with your state offices and governor's offices on that.
Well, I wish I'd change it.
That's
Joe, to us, that's where the rural areas get left out. They tend to put that money toward the 5 beach cities here and then expect them to do stuff in the rural, and that just really doesn't happen. So we will keep our eyes on that. Thank you. Anybody else for questions? Comments? Ridicule? We know there's still a lot of unanswered questions. We do thank y'all for joining us today. Does anybody?
Tell us about the infrastructure.
Yeah, can we go ahead and hear a little bit about the infrastructure bill if you've got some time?
Yeah, sure. We can
I'll let-
skip ahead to that.
I'll let you tackle that one, and then I'll offer an opinion.
Yeah, this one a little bit is anyone's guess right now. So the Biden administration has put out a few different infrastructure sort of proposals, the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan proposal, and there are a variety of different things in those proposals: transportation, broadband, workforce development, drinking water, housing, even some funding for schools and education, and a variety of other provisions. There are also, and I'm sure our congressional staff can actually give us an even more updated look, but there's also legislation that's been released in the House. The House has been working through, and also Senate bills that the Senate has been working through. So there's some proposals, there's some counter proposals. What we know for sure is that the FAST Act has a September 2021 expiration. So we're inching closer and closer to that FAST Act expiration. It was already extended for a year from September 2020 to September 2021. And so they're gonna have to do something. Our congressional friends may be able to say more about what it's looking like might happen. I think it's probably entirely possible that we get a shorter term extension with the FAST Act, but there's really some concrete proposals, a lot of different concrete proposals out at this point. And so this is something that is moving, and I think we're likely to have an infrastructure bill that comes together at least within the next year.
Yeah, and I would add too that between Muriel and me, I'm the worst prognosticator for whether legislation moves forward. So anytime I say it's going to happen, it rarely happens. And anytime I say it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, it happens. So I'm going on record to say this is not going to happen, so it will. The thing I wanted to add is there's a bullet point on the rural priorities, and I think if there is some agreement from both sides of the aisle, from House and Senate, there is a real interest in rural priorities, and if you do want to dig deeper, that's a good link to check out. That a lot of what we're hearing is fortunately some emphasis on rural infrastructure, not just some of the larger metropolitan areas. So we're excited about that part of it, and I think unlike some of the challenges you said you might be having on the state level, I do think that if there is an agreement with an infrastructure package, that there will be sufficient opportunities for rural communities. So we're excited about that.
And a few different links if you want to go through some of the fact sheets. There's a rural fact sheet, as Joe mentioned, American Jobs Plan, Families Plan, Senate, House are all linked here. So I know that if these slides get shared, you'll have some resources there if you kind of want to look into some of the different proposals. But I think we're feeling fairly confident that something will come together.
Is it going to be mainly roads, bridges, and rail, or do we have any sense of that right now?
That's a great question. That's one I can't answer. There's definitely different schools of thought on whether it should be sort of more of a pared down package or whether it should have a much broader list of inclusions. So you see these are kind of the White House inclusions. And you see it's much broader. It does include broadband, it includes housing, schools, and it also includes funding for things like EDA and USDA and HUD. So more than just roads and bridges there, but of course we may not end up with what the White House has put out. We may very well end up with some kind of compromise legislation that is more targeted. So it's a great question, but that's one I think it's a bit impossible to answer at this point.
Any questions? How are things opening back up in DC? What's the climate like in DC as far as travel?
Well, my home is in Asheville, North Carolina, and I've been in Asheville most of the year. I went back to DC the 1st of June, and it's much different than I think in Asheville and other communities. It's a slower moving process. I think I'm the only one well, I think there's 6 cars in my building. Usually there's 100. So it's slowly getting there. From our discussions with our federal partners, we're hearing maybe Labor Day or even the 1st of 2022 for everyone to get back into operation. So I can tell you, I love my commute to work. It's unlike it was in years past, but it's I think much slower than other communities across the country.
Okay.
Yeah, agencies and Senate and House buildings have been pretty slow to reopen to the public at this point. I don't know of any agency staff that are allowing public meetings to come in yet. So agencies are still pretty kind of closed down to the public. And I know for the Senate and the House, it's only on a very occasional basis at all that they're accepting visitors, to the best of my knowledge. So things are a little bit slower to open back up here in DC. You're not missing anything yet, but we hope that we can get back to fly-ins and conferences and all of that in the near future.
Thank you all for that. Does anybody else have any questions? We don't want to hold them up. I know they've got. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. We'll pay our dues now. We already have.
I know you have. I checked before I got on the call.
That's funny. Well, thank you all so much. We may have some questions with y'all. We may want to talk with y'all again at some point, but we really do appreciate y'all joining us.
No problem. And again, there's my email and Muriel's email. If you have questions, we may not have answers. We'll try to track it down. I encourage you to work through the staff there. We'll provide continuous information and updates as we get them, but certainly appreciate the opportunity to share what we know with you.
Hey, Joe, one last question. And when this money was put forward, my understanding was that the intent was to be similar to federal revenue sharing on steroids, and that Congress really did want local governments to have flexibility. You know, as you know, all of our local governments are audited by, you know, the state comptrollers, different state entities and whatnot. And there's been, I guess, some apprehension expressed by them that, one, you don't want to obligate both tranches because you're not likely to get the second tranche of money. Two, if you don't stick with what's in black and white, and I heard Muriel say time and time again, presumption that you're going to have to pay this back. And three, we're coming to get you. And I mean, I know they'll audit, and I know they can question cost in budgets, but ultimately, is it not Treasury that will make those decisions as to whether something was eligible or not?
I'll go back to your first point. In everyone we've talked to on the Hill, and with our federal agencies, they have all said the same thing, that the intent is to be as flexible as possible with these dollars, knowing that a lot of the focus is going to be on recovery, economic recovery. Treasury is assigned to make, I guess, the final determination. That does not mean that If you have challenges, you should, as you normally do with any federal funds, work through your congressional offices and so forth. But I know the intent from those that pass the legislation and those that are responsible for implementing it is to be as flexible as possible within certainly guidelines. And I think with local governments, they're aware of the fact that you guys have to have audits. You are physically responsible to your constituency and your citizens. So I'm hoping, I think it's just going to take time for Treasury to provide the full guidance. And I know there's hesitancy to spend that money. I mean, the only thing I could do is encourage patience, but the intent is still, from my understanding, from everyone we've talked to, is that it is flexible to allow the local communities, local governments to decide how to best impact their communities based on their economies and so forth. So I know it's right. I think initially I have to put things in black and white. I think once the interim rules, I think they're going to have a lot of comments. There'll be guidance continuing to be updated, but I would not be concerned at this point that it's going to be very restrictive. I think it's going to be a lot more flexible than the current guidelines that are issued by Treasury.
And should local governments be concerned about you may get the first 50%, but you won't see the second?
I have not heard that from anyone. I've not heard that at all. I have not heard it. That would surprise me greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Muriel. Does anybody else have any questions before we let them go? All right. Well, thank y'all for joining us so much.
Thank you again.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
the time.
Yeah. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good evening. Yes, sir.
I'll say this, for the state and local governments of Tennessee, is in a meeting a couple weeks ago with the comptroller's office. They are most certainly going to take the lead in this for our local governments. They are probably going to hire a third-party company.
The Horn Group.
They will lead us through this process. Federal government cannot all the local government. That's right. So the responsibility of following the comptroller's office. First of all, make sure that we all understand that. So, the prevailing thought in that meeting a couple weeks ago was just wait. We don't know a lot yet. You have a long time to spend this money, to obligate this money, 3 or 4 years. And as we know more about it, as things come about, more rules and all that, then local governments can make those necessary decisions, but do not have to be made right now. So encourage folks to wait and just find out more and then go from there.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think we all understand that. I think where we get into issues is when they hired the Horn Group the last time, they gave us some bad advice and some stuff that was not, they told us was not eligible, turned out to be eligible. So that was the issue. That's one of the reasons we were looking at getting an expert at the federal level, because ultimately it'll be, I mean, I understand they can't solve it everybody, but they can't help but say.
We got an election
That is part of the issue, is that not only that, this will transition not only y'all's elections, but your commission's elections. I mean, you know, so trying to get a plan together. And again, I think it is about how you go about justifying it, how you document it, how you verify it, all of those kinds of things. And that's why I wanted to say to you all, let's put some additional expertise on retainer that we can go to have us do it the right way from the get-go. If you look at the interim rule, and again, it's interim, it's like if you're in a qualified census tract, you could just about go out there and hand out dollar bills almost. I mean, it's just wide open. You know, so you wanna do it accurately and you wanna do it correctly. You know, and I know when Jason said that about the second trench, it's the wording in the bill. It's the same wording that's in all the state contracts. that everybody sees. We reserve the right to terminate this contract with a certain amount of notice, depending on the availability of funding. But it's not, the intent of Congress is not to pull back on that second tranche of money. We just need to be strategic, catalytic, transformational, and do it the right way. So, and we're prepared to help you all do that and navigate some of those waters. There's a difference in being so correct that there's, I guess it's, nothing gets questioned. I mean, and it's, if you don't want anything to get questioned, just adhere to everything that was in black and white, and then you won't get a question because like she said, you've got the presumption of it being eligible. But if you try to, and what we encountered are what our local governments and some of our not-for-profits encountered with the Horn Group was, it was just like swimming. It was swimming backwards and uphill, and people just, a lot of people gave up.
We gave $450,000.
That was to connect low and moderate income citizens to broadband. And the reason being that they rejected that was because a bill of lading relative to the shipping of the wire that was going to the house could not be provided with the date after March whatever and before. Well, they weren't buying the fiber. The fiber was already in the warehouse. It had already been centrally procured. It was eligible. But you know, and again, I'm all for crossing T's and dotting I's, but you know.
Mr. Chairman, I want to put forward a motion that we obtain services involved for.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to retain the professional services of Mr. Lloyd. Any questions or comments about it? What period of time is it for?
This is for the entire year. So from the date that we signed the contract, for 12 months.
The only thing I'm wondering,
It'll have been flow, yeah.
if we start it now, it's another year before we ever get any more answers, and we've wasted a year with somebody that no matter how smart he is, he doesn't have any answers because they don't.
Right. It's a number of hours that we draw against. So the timely,
Some discussion.
yeah, the
too,
timely
on
can be
availability.
extended is what I'm saying. So we
Reason
don't have
it'll
to
roll
start.
over, though.
Yes,
It'll roll over
it'll
the
keep
years.
rolling
Yeah,
forward. Yes, it covers a certain number of hours of service. So, yes.
No other questions or comments?
I also told them that we would want him available at what point the comptrollers or any of your auditors come and question a cost to help us justify those. So,
One of the few things they have answered is that we get to keep the interest.
That's correct.
absolutely.
So should we all be drawing down this money as soon as possible and getting it at an interest-bearing account and drawing interest while we're getting answers?
Absolutely. The interest earned belongs to the communities.
Even if we
No
have to pay it
strings
back, if we
attached.
don't spend it, we've gotten interest
You
on
got
it.
the interest off of it. That is correct. And they didn't talk about it, but if you're going to do infrastructure projects with these dollars, there are no NEPA requirements on these dollars. Now, if you're matching them meritly with some other programmatic dollars that require environmentals, then we will have to still do the environmental. And let's talk a little bit about the EDA dollars. That's a huge amount of money. Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's go ahead and get this passed first and we'll go on. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Opposed likewise. Motion passes to retain the professional services of Mr. Lloyd for 1 year.
Or
with the
for
option
the
of-
250 hours or whatever he put in there for the whatever time period that hours of service.
Now, what were you gonna bring up?
EDA dollars, folks. Part of this is about being in the right place at the right time. Please, if there are projects that you want to pursue, do not wait to get them engineered. Okay? Get the pre-planning documents done. We can do a lot of things relative to competitive applications but we can't make up engineered cost, okay? And when they say EDA is gonna have 10 times more money, that means they're probably, typically, they like to put $1 million, $1.5 million in a deal. They haven't got any more people. So you can imagine that they're gonna have pots of monies that they're gonna wanna be putting out in $3 million chunks. So if you've got infrastructure projects, I know Mayor Huth, your wastewater treatment plant that needs to be rehabbed, now's the time to talk about some of this. What makes EDA competitive, and they'll still have some of these requirements, are job creation and private capital investment. So if you've got new companies that are locating or existing companies that are expanding, I've already told you this, let's use them. Don't let them do that without getting some help from them. Typically, they're always wanting incentives, but we also tell you, if you know of any expansion that's going on or any new investment, it's time to take a look. Do we need a new water tank? Do we need to rehab our sewer system? What do we need to do? Let's use those investments and those job creation numbers to be competitive for EDA funding. You need to talk to your state legislators. They're going to give that EDA money to the State Department of Tourist Development. I don't know what they'll do in Georgia. Just remember, typically they turn around and give those to the Big Five. That'd be the Chattanooga Tourism Company. And that's great if they will help market the assets that are out in the region. We don't see that very much. We might see the Akoi, but we don't see a lot of the things that are in our rural areas being marketed by the big cities. We just don't. That's not who their membership is. They have members at the Chattanooga Tourism Company. It's the aquarium, it's Rock City, it's Ruby Falls. You know, it's not Pigeon Mountain. It's not some of the other places that exist. And we usually work together to try to leverage marketing. But just be aware of that if that's going to happen. So, yeah. All right.
Anything else?
Is lunch here?
Yeah, lunch is ready.
What's the plan, Maddie? How do we do this? Out this door?
Yeah, we have lunch, it's available, it's Cracker Barrel, and they brought plenty of food.
We're gonna put some tables
We're
out.
gonna put some tables out. If y'all will go through this door and walk down the hallway, and you can come in, there are Cokes and waters in the fridge as well. We have tea as well.
Our planning retreat, strategic planning retreat, local governments, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of September. It's in Pigeon Forge. We tried to go to the new Fall Creek Falls Resort, and they would not book any events till 2022. So we will take care of your reservation. Those that have been before can tell you it is drinking from the end of a fire hose. It will be worth your time and your effort. We usually use it as our work plan, and you get your wish list for now and the next decade or whatever. Our meeting on the 22nd of September will probably be a meeting with our legislators. So we didn't get to go to Nashville with them, so we're going to invite them to a meeting on the 22nd, to our executive meeting.
22nd, 28th.
Yeah, 22nd of September. That's our other meeting date.
Not the 28th.
Oh, is it 28th? Whatever the date is in
Okay,
there.
28th
I'm sorry, the
what's on there.
28th. Is that the 4th Tuesday?
Just want to make
Okay,
sure I have
28th. I'm sorry, 28th.
So September the 1st through the 3rd, and then September the 28th,
Yes.
and that will be. 28th.
It'll be here in Chattanooga. We'll probably do it at the Walling Club,
Okay.
since it's our legislators.
Anything else to come up today? If not, we will adjourn to lunch. Thank you all
Read
for
the
being here.
program reports. The staff's been real busy. Please look at the program reports about what's been going on in aging and community development, economic development, grants report. Please.